So for our own analysis, we bring in Dominick Izzo, former police officer and author of Before the Badge, Everything You Need to Know Before Becoming a Cop. Thank you so much for joining me, Dominick.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, we're just going to cut straight to it. Help me out. From your point of view, your experience, and everything we know right now to the public, should Derek Chauvin be charged with the murder of George Floyd?
No, and that's just based on what I feel and the limited knowledge I have of Minnesota state law. For murder, no. I think once again, when people are seeking justice from a community, I think pressures from if they have a state's attorney or district attorney or their attorney general, they overshot with charges just to wind up appeasing the public. I think this is going to turn out bad either way, but murder charges don't fit this, and it's going to be bad.
It's interesting, Derek, that you bring that up. It's interesting that you actually bring this up, Dominick, because I do agree. There's the PR element to this, is have obviously a huge focus. We already saw the riots last year. Now you have this, you said it yourself, I don't know if this can end up well, regardless of what the verdict is. But this week, there's been a lot of this focus put on the amount of drugs that were in George Floyd's system. I actually listened to a tidbit from your show last night, your radio show last night. Does it matter that Floyd ingested a lethal dose of fentanyl in the actual final prosecution of the policeman?
In my opinion, no. He could have had an asthma attack. He could have been on doctor-prescribed medication. The job of the police to keep the peace and maintain order in a free society. What Derek Chauvin did, in my professional opinion, was punitive. It was punishment. There was no justification for him holding that technique that long, irregardless of whether or not it wound up causing, or in my opinion, I don't believe that tactic caused death. I don't. If he had pressure on his carotid artery for any longer than 5 seconds, Floyd would have been passed out. But to hold it there for 9+ minutes, it was insulting. It was meant to be punitive. It was a disgrace, and that has to be addressed. And I honestly think that's crueler. I think that's crueler than George Floyd's death, because it was done on purpose, because he could as a police officer. And I think it's absolutely abhorrent and disgusting.
Well, actions have consequences, and this is what you're seeing, I think, on both sides of it. When I'm looking at this, though, from your professional background, everything that you've looked at, how do you think this situation should have been handled differently? As I know other officers are looking at it going, okay, if I was in that situation, how would I have read it and how would I have handled it?
One of the things in law enforcement is we all condemn one another for critiquing and armchair quarterbacking. But if more police officers actually sat there and armchair quarterbacked, perhaps it'd be a little bit better profession, especially now. To be honest, you had from what I was told, two rookie cops who was on either their first week of field training, who were right there pinning down Floyd. You had a fourth cop who was, guarding the perimeter. It would have been nice to just have somebody lean over and say, hey, Derek, you may want to get off him. We have him secured. He's in handcuffs. He's no longer a threat. I just think common sense would have prevailed on that. But there is zero justification, zero excuse to hold that tactic for that long. There is nothing you could do to justify it.
Well, and that's what I happen to agree with you on that side of it, because when you're looking at, obviously, the brutal force that was used, at that point, the cops' lives were not in danger. No one else's lives were in danger. He was actually maintained. It might not have been ideal, but that obviously looks like an overuse of force. But here's my other problem. This is the bigger picture of this moving forward, and I think you're already seeing it, and you were seeing it for the past couple decades. Recruiting new officers, future officers, has become probably very challenging, especially in these metropolitan areas. Defunding the police, taking money away, and putting them more in situations where they too likely could face, if they make a bad decision, jail time and obviously public scrutiny like what we're seeing in this case. How do situations like this do for recruiting future officers, like in metropolitan areas that are known for controversy?
Well, unfortunately, you have command staff and village, your municipality, which is going to distance themselves from all the issue there. What cop wants to be a cop today when all they're going to do is they're going to put their hands on a person of color and become the next YouTube sensation in a negative way? It's not a good sign. But this is what law enforcement gets. This is what it gets for dropping their standards for the last decade plus. One of the things that I've talked about, which I abhorrently disagree with, is concepts such as like a college degree. I've always said, why do we have 21-year-old men who are this is not like the 1940s and 50s where 21-year-olds were mature. It's a different state and age. But why do we have these college graduates who have zero life experience, coming right onto your streets and trying to relate to people in community settings? There's no relation. There's no ability to talk to your community. Community policing is a joke because it's a redundant term and no one's going to it. I think that this sets a bad standard. I think you're going to get subpar candidates even more. I think the training is going to be even more convoluted, and it's just going to be more expectations out of law enforcement instead of going back to basics and hitting those hard as they can. This is just not going to turn out well for law enforcement in the long run, and I think a lot of cops know it.
Dominic, I happen to agree with you. I also think so many times in these situations we put the focus on the bad people that live in these communities, and that's the only time that we have conversation about these communities. We don't talk about the hundreds of thousands of people there that just want to live a good life and want to continue to earn the American dream. And they're good people. They want to be safe. They want their children safe. We don't ever actually focus on what they need. The only time attention comes into their community is when something bad happens. Dominic, great talking to you. We'll have you back on.
Thank you. Appreciate that.